The rain fell in cold, relentless sheets, plastering the thin silk of her dress to her skin. One moment, she was standing on a priceless Persian rug in the grand foyer of the Park family mansion. The next, the heavy oak door slammed shut, its final, booming echo of verdict on her life. The security gates, wrought iron monstrosities shaped like snarling dragons, slid closed with a hydraulic hiss, locking her out, locking her into the storm. Zara pressed a trembling hand to her cheek, the sting of her mother-in-law's diamond rings still a fresh, hot memory. The words echoed louder than the thunder overhead. Worthless. Disgrace. A stain on their family name. Her husband, Park Seo-joon, had watched it all, his expression one of bored indifference, as if she were a piece of furniture being repossessed. It was his father, the formidable Chairman Park, whose quiet, chilling decree had sealed her fate. Remove her. 2 words. And her entire world, the fragile, gilded cage she had inhabited for 2 years, had shattered. She sank to the wet pavement, the gravel digging into her knees. All she had was the phone clutched in her hand, its screen a spiderweb of cracks from where she dropped it. Her fingers, numb with cold and shock, fumbled to unlock it. There was one number, a single, unsaved contact, given to her months ago by a maid who had seen the shadows growing in Zara's eyes. For emergencies, the old woman had whispered, pressing the slip of paper into her palm. If they ever try to bury you, this man, he keeps men like the chairman honest. Honesty. What a joke. With a certainty born of absolute desperation, she knew this was a call from which there was no return. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She was 20 years old, an art history student who had given up her scholarship, her country, her future, for a fairy tale that turned out to be a horror story. She had nothing left to lose. Her message was short, stripped of all but the essential facts. Chairman Park. He's broken the agreement. I'm out. She hit send. The small, delivered notification appeared beneath the text bubble. Then nothing. The rain intensified, washing away the last of her hope. She closed her eyes, letting the cold seep into her bones. Maybe this was it. Maybe she would just stop. A pair of headlights sliced through the darkness, so sharp and white they hurt her eyes. A black Genesis G90, long and sleek and silent as a predator, pulled up to the curb. It didn't belong in this neighborhood of ostentatious European luxury cars. It was too understated, too severe, too dangerous. The back door opened. A man stepped out, a large black umbrella blooming open to shield him from the deluge. He didn't hurry. He moved with an unnerving, deliberate grace, his polished black dress shoes making no sound on the wet asphalt. The suit he wore was charcoal gray, tailored so perfectly it seemed fused to his frame. Even in the gloom, she could see the faint glint of a silver watch on his wrist, the stark white of his shirt cuffs. He stopped a few feet away from her, the umbrella shielding them both. She could smell the faint, clean scent of rain on expensive wool and something else, a subtle cologne with notes of cedar and smoke. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't offer a word of comfort. His eyes, dark and unreadable, took in her drenched form, the blooming bruise on her cheek, the torn hem of her dress. Then he spoke, and his voice was a low, resonant baritone that cut through the storm. Get in the car, Zara. It was the first time she had ever heard him say her name. Kwon Ji-han. The man who had brokered the merger between her father-in-law's company and a rival, the silent partner at dinners whose presence made even the arrogant Chairman Park seem subdued. She had only ever seen him from a distance. Up close, his stillness was an entity of its own, a palpable force. The way he said her name wasn't a request. It was an instruction. It was a claim. Numbly, she did as she was told. The car's interior was black leather and cool, conditioned air. It was utterly silent. 2 men sat in the front, their faces impassive, their dark suits identical. They were shadows, extensions of the man beside her. The door closed with a soft, heavy thud, sealing them inside, and the world outside, the rain, the mansion, her ruined life, vanished. The car pulled away from the curb as smoothly as it had arrived. Zara stared at her hands, twisted in her lap. She was trading one monster for another, and she knew it. But as she risked a glance at the man beside her, at the hard, carved line of his jaw and the absolute certainty in his posture, she felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Not hope. It was too early for hope. It was the faintest, most terrifying flicker of possibility. They drove through the glittering, rain-slicked streets of Gangnam, but they didn't stop at a hotel, a hospital, or a police station. The car descended into a private underground garage beneath a skyscraper that pierced the clouds, a needle of black glass and steel. Jihan led her to a private elevator, his hand hovering at the small of her back without ever making contact. The elevator ascended with dizzying, silent speed. The doors opened directly into a penthouse apartment. The view was breathtaking. An entire wall of floor-to-ceiling glass revealed the sprawling panorama of Seoul, its lights a galaxy of jewels scattered across the dark, wet landscape. The space was vast, minimalist, and cold. Black leather sofas, chrome and glass tables, polished dark wood floors. It was less a home and more a monument to power. The elevator doors slid shut behind them. The click was soft, but it sounded as final as a vault being sealed. Jihan shrugged out of his suit jacket, revealing the perfect fit of his white shirt and the dark leather of a shoulder holster. He laid the jacket over the back of a sofa. "You'll be safe here," he said, his back to her as he walked toward the window. Zara hugged herself, a sudden chill running through her that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. He turned his head slightly, his profile sharp against the city lights. "You will also not leave." The words hung in the air, as stark and unyielding as the steel frame of the building. She had escaped the chairman's mansion, a prison of tradition and cruelty. Now, she stood in Kwon Jihan's fortress in the sky. A gilded cage, but a cage all the same. And its owner was infinitely more dangerous than the man she had just fled. That was the moment she understood. Her life was no longer her own. It had been claimed. The next morning, Zara awoke in a bed larger than her entire dorm room had been. She was wearing a soft, gray t-shirt and sweatpants that had been left folded at the foot of the bed. Her ruined dress was gone. Sunlight streamed through a gap in the heavy blackout curtains, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. For a disoriented moment, she had no idea where she was. Then the memory of the rain, the slammed door, and Kwon Jihan's cold eyes came rushing back. She explored the suite she was in. It had its own bathroom, stocked with expensive, unfamiliar products, and a walk-in closet that was currently empty save for the clothes she now wore. The silence of the penthouse was absolute, a weighted blanket that seemed to absorb all sound. When she finally ventured out, she found Jihan in a glass-walled office at the far end of the main living area. He was on the phone, speaking in a low, even tone. He didn't look up, but she knew he was aware of her presence. It was a feeling she couldn't shake, the sense that his attention was a physical thing, a constant, low-level hum in the background of her existence. A quiet, middle-aged woman appeared, introducing herself as the housekeeper, and showed her to the kitchen, where a simple breakfast was laid out. The woman didn't meet her eyes. No one here did, except for him. It was a world of ghosts, and he was the only solid thing in it. Later that day, a doctor arrived. A woman with a kind face and tired eyes. She examined Zara's bruises with professional detachment, prescribing a cream for the swelling. Jihan stood in the doorway of the bedroom the entire time, his arms crossed over his chest. He was silent, his expression unreadable, but Zara saw it again, a flicker of something dark and violent in the depths of his eyes as the doctor gently probed the mark on her cheek. It wasn't pity. It was something colder, something that felt like rage being put on ice. He carried his control like a shield, but she was beginning to see the cracks. His power wasn't just in his wealth or his men. It was in his stillness, his surgical precision. But beneath it, there was a furnace. She wondered what it would take to make it burn. Days bled into a week. Jihan was a constant, peripheral presence. He worked relentlessly from his office, took meetings in the living room with men whose faces were as hard as his, and ate his meals in silence across a vast dining table from her. He provided her with clothes, simple, elegant pieces in muted colors, and a shelf of books on art history. The gesture was so specific, so personal, it was more unsettling than any threat. He knew who she had been before she became Mrs. Park Seo-jun. One night, unable to sleep, she wandered the silent penthouse. A door she had assumed was a closet was slightly ajar. Curiosity, an impulse she thought had been beaten out of her, got the better of her. She pushed it open. It was another study, smaller and more personal than his glass office. A heavy oak desk, shelves of leather-bound books, and on the corner of the desk, a single, silver-framed photograph. She picked it up. It was Jihan younger, smiling a genuine, unguarded smile. Beside him stood a young woman with the same dark eyes and high cheekbones. She was laughing, her head thrown back in joy. Zara turned the frame over. A small, engraved plaque on the back read, Jia. Summer, 5 years ago. The boss does not like people in this room. Zara spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. One of Jihan's men stood in the doorway. He was younger than the others, with a long scar that cut through his left eyebrow. His name was Sung. He was Jihan's right hand, the one who moved with the same quiet efficiency as his master. She expected him to be angry, to drag her out. Instead, his gaze fell to the photograph in her hand, and his expression softened almost imperceptibly. His sister, Sung said, his voice quiet. She was caught in the crossfire of a territory dispute, with a man not unlike your father-in-law. A man who thought the rules didn't apply to him. He looked at Zara then, and for the first time, she saw a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. The arrangement Jihan has with men like Chairman Park, it is not about business. It is about preventing that. No collateral damage.
No innocence.
The chairman broke the most important rule when he laid a hand on you. The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just about a broken contract. For Jihan, this was personal. She, an unwilling participant, had become the symbol of a failure he refused to repeat. She was the ghost of his sister. Given a second chance, he was determined not to waste. The relative peace of her gilded cage was shattered 2 days later. Chairman Park was not a man who took kindly to being defied. He couldn't use the police, their arrangement ran too deep, so he used his own brand of muscle. Thugs. The first report came from Sung. A restaurant Jihan owned in Itaewon had been shot up. No one was killed, but the message was clear. Give her back. Jihan's reaction was terrifying in its absence. He didn't shout or pace. He simply stood at the window, his hands clasped behind his back, and a cold, predatory stillness descended over him. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. The next attack was more direct. Jihan was called away to deal with the fallout from the restaurant, leaving Sung and 2 other guards at the penthouse. It was the opening Park's men were waiting for. The first sign of trouble was a soft chime, followed by the building's automated voice announcing a security breach in the private elevator lobby. Sung was instantly on his feet, drawing his weapon. Stay back, he ordered Zara. She could hear shouting, the sickening thud of fists hitting flesh. Alarms began to blare, a shrill, piercing sound. Sung and the other guard were a whirlwind of motion, engaging the men pouring out of the elevator. Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through Zara. The emergency stairwell door was just down the hall. Sung saw her looking at it. Go, he yelled, ducking under a wild swing from a man with a pipe. Get out of here. She could run. She could take her chances and disappear into the city. For a split second, she considered it. But then she saw another of Park's men, moving stealthily along the far wall, a long knife in his hand. He was flanking Sung, who was too busy with the man in front of him to notice. Zara didn't think. She acted. Her eyes landed on a heavy, abstract glass sculpture on a pedestal near the wall. It was all curves and sharp edges. She grabbed it, her hands screaming at the weight, and swung it with all her might into the side of the ambusher's head. The man crumpled to the floor with a grunt. The sculpture shattered, sending shards of glass skittering across the polished floor. The sound, sharp and violent, gave Sung the opening he needed. He dispatched his own opponent and turned to face the new threat, his eyes wide with surprise when he saw Zara standing there, breathing heavily, her hands bleeding from the broken glass. She hadn't run. In a fight that was not her own, for a man she barely knew, she had chosen a side. When Jihan returned, the scene was one of controlled chaos. His men were securing the intruders, who were bruised and zip-tied on the floor. Sung was briefing him in a low, urgent tone. Jihan's eyes scanned the room, cataloging the damage, his face a mask of cold fury. Then his gaze found Zara. He walked directly to her, ignoring everyone and everything else. He bypassed Sung, his focus absolute. He reached her, and his hands came up, not to strike or restrain, but to check. His fingers, surprisingly gentle, skimmed over her arms, her shoulders, before coming to rest on her jaw, tilting her face up to the light. His thumb brushed over her cheek, near the fading bruise from her father-in-law. "Did they touch you?" His voice was a low growl, a dangerous vibration she felt in her bones. She shook her head, unable to speak. His dark eyes searched hers, looking for any hint of a lie. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, charged with an intensity that made the air crackle. He had been holding his breath. She saw the minute release of tension in his shoulders when he finally believed her. That was the moment everything changed. His protection was no longer about a principle or a memory of his sister. It was about her. And that was a far more dangerous proposition for them both. The attack on the penthouse drew a line in the sand. Jihan's world, once a place of calculated risks and controlled violence, now had a new, unpredictable variable, her. The quiet spaces between them, once filled with tension and uncertainty, were now laced with something else, something sharper. He started training her, not with weapons but with awareness. He taught her how to spot a tail, how to recognize the subtle shift in a room's atmosphere when danger entered it, how to use her unassuming presence as a shield. He was sharpening her for the world he inhabited. Chairman Park, however, was not a man to be deterred by a failed assault. He was an old predator, and when cornered, he grew more vicious. He escalated. Jihan had a meeting with the heads of the other major families, a neutral ground affair in a private room at the Shilla Hotel. He insisted Zara come with him. "You are safest where I can see you," he'd stated, leaving no room for argument. They were walking through the hotel's underground parking garage, flanked by Sung and 3 other men, when a white delivery van parked near the exit exploded. The force of the blast was a physical blow, a wave of heat and pressure that threw them all forward. Jihan reacted with inhuman speed. He shoved Zara down, twisting his body to cover hers as concrete and metal shrapnel rained down around them. The world went silent, replaced by a high-pitched ringing in her ears. The acrid smell of smoke and burnt chemicals filled her lungs. For a terrifying, heart-stopping second, the weight of him on top of her was just dead weight. He wasn't moving. Panic, pure and primal, seized her. She pushed against his shoulders. "Jihan." He stirred, groaning, and pushed himself up. Blood trickled from a gash on his temple, stark red against his pale skin. His suit was torn, his hair disheveled. But his eyes, when they met hers, were blazing with a cold, murderous fury she had never seen before. He ignored his own injury, his hands immediately checking her over. "Are you hurt?" His voice was tight, strained. "Zara, answer me." "I'm fine," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You're bleeding." He ignored her, his gaze sweeping over the chaos. His men were already moving, weapons drawn, creating a perimeter. The attack had been a message, brutal and public. Park was no longer trying to get her back. He was trying to prove Jihan couldn't protect her. Back in the penthouse, as the doctor stitched the cut on his temple, Zara watched him. He took the pain without flinching, his jaw set. She knew then that being a passive victim was no longer an option. Survival wasn't enough. She needed to fight back. She had to give him a weapon that only she possessed. Later that night, she found him in his glass office, staring down at the city. "Seo Jun," she said, her voice steady and cold. "My husband. He has a weakness." Jihan turned slowly, his dark eyes fixing on her. "He gambles," she continued, the words coming easier now. "Heavily. And he has a secret apartment in Apgujeong he uses for his affairs. He thinks his father doesn't know about it. He's arrogant and he's careless. He keeps records there. Ledgers, deal notes, things that are supposed to be in his father's safe. Things that prove the chairman has been skimming from his partners." She was handing him the key to her former family's destruction. She was using the intimate, ugly secrets of her marriage as a weapon. And she felt no guilt, only a cold, clean sense of purpose. Jihan listened, his expression unchanging, but she saw a new light in his eyes. A flicker of respect. He didn't question her. He simply nodded, a short, sharp gesture of acknowledgement. His men raided the apartment that night. They found everything she had promised and more. The leverage was enough to cripple Chairman Park, to turn his allies against him and shatter his empire from the inside. The next evening, Jihan found her on the balcony, watching the last vestiges of sunset paint the sky. He came to stand beside her, the silence between them now a familiar comfort. "You have a capacity for ruthlessness I did not anticipate," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, tinged with something that sounded almost like admiration. She didn't look at him. "Your world teaches hard lessons." "That it does," he murmured. He leaned against the railing, his shoulder almost brushing hers. "I told myself that bringing you here was about upholding an agreement." A matter of principle, his voice dropped, becoming so low it was almost a whisper, meant only for her. "I was lying to myself." The confession hung in the air, more intimate than a touch, more binding than a promise. She was no longer a principle. She was the reason. The information from Seo Jun's apartment sent shockwaves through the Seoul underworld. Chairman Park's empire began to crumble as partners pulled out and allies turned their backs. A cornered animal is at its most dangerous. Park made one final, desperate move. He put out a contract. Not on Jihan. On her. Sung brought the news, his face grim. A photo of her, taken during a society gala months ago, was circulating in the darkest corners of the web. Her name. And a price. Enough money to make any hungry killer in the city take the risk. Chairman Park's message was brutally simple. "If I'm going down, I'm taking her with me. Jihan cannot protect you forever." The threat was no longer just his problem. It was hers. Her life was the prize in a war she never wanted to start. The contract changed the air in the penthouse. It was no longer a sanctuary, it was a target. The quiet professionalism of Jihan's men was now strained with a new tension. Zara was a liability. She could feel it in their averted eyes, in the way they stiffened when she entered a room. But Jihan's resolve was absolute. He gathered his senior men, his lieutenants, in the vast living room. Zara stood by the window, a silent observer. "The contract on Zara is a declaration of war against our entire family," Jihan announced, his voice ringing with cold authority. "She is under my protection. Any man in this room who feels that is a burden is free to leave now. But if you stay, you will defend her as you would defend me. There will be no confusion on this point." No one moved. The loyalty he commanded was a palpable force, a wall of silence and steel. But Zara knew it wasn't enough. They couldn't hide in this tower forever. The only way to end this was to cut the head off the snake. She waited until they were alone. The city lights a silent audience outside the glass wall. "I can get you inside the mansion," she said quietly. Jihan turned from the window, his expression unreadable. "My men have analyzed the schematics. It's a fortress." "Not for me," she replied, stepping closer. Chairman Park is a man of habit and arrogance. Every Thursday night, he meets with his inner circle in the panic room hidden behind the library wall. He reviews the physical ledgers, the ones he doesn't trust to any digital format. She took a breath. "The security for that wing, the biometrics, they're tied to me. To my fingerprints, my retinal scan. I was family." He was too arrogant, too certain of my powerlessness, to ever change them. She was offering herself as the key. The Trojan horse. This was her decisive act. She would not be a damsel to be rescued. She would be the weapon that ended the war. The plan was executed with the surgical precision that defined Kwon Jihan. 2 nights later, under the cloak of a new moon, they moved. A convoy of black sedans, silent as ghosts, slipped through the back roads of the exclusive neighborhood. Zara rode with Jihan, the silence in the car thick with unspoken tension. She wore a simple black outfit, her hair pulled back. She felt strangely calm. At a service entrance hidden by overgrown ivy, she placed her hand on a biometric scanner. A soft green light blinked, and a lock clicked open. She led them through the sterile, white corridors of the staff wing, a path she had walked 1,000 times in misery, now a path to reclamation. They reached the library, It was just as she remembered it, smelling of old leather and floor polish, a mausoleum of books no one ever read. Jihan's men, 5 of them including Sung, moved like shadows, securing the exits. Jihan gave her a nod. She walked to a specific shelf, running her fingers along the spines of the books until she found a false one. She pressed it. A section of the wall slid back with a low hum, revealing a reinforced steel door with another scanner. This was it. But as she reached for the scanner, the main library doors burst open. Chairman Park stood there, flanked by his own guards. He held a pistol, and his face was a mask of pure hatred. "Did you really think it would be that easy, you little whore?" he snarled. A firefight erupted in the enclosed space. The sound of silenced weapons was a series of deadly coughs. Jihan moved with a fluid, lethal grace, a phantom dispensing death. But Park had one last, pathetic card to play. Her ex-husband, Seo Jun, scrambled from behind his father and grabbed Zara, yanking her in front of him as a shield. He pressed the cold muzzle of a gun to her temple. His hand trembled, and he smelled of sweat and fear. "Let us walk," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "Let us walk or she dies." Across the room, Jihan froze. His weapon was trained on them, but he had no clean shot. His face was a terrifying mask of cold, controlled fury. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Zara looked at the sniveling, pathetic man holding her, the man who had watched her be abused and discarded without a word. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the weakness she had told Jihan about. She would not be his bargaining chip. She didn't scream or struggle. She did what he would never expect. With a sudden, violent motion, she stomped her heel down, hard, on the arch of his foot. He grunted in pain, his posture faltering. In that same instant, she drove her elbow backward, jamming it into his ribs. His grip loosened for a fraction of a second. It was all the opening Jihan needed. A single, soft thud. Seo Jun's eyes went wide with surprise, a small, dark hole appearing in his forehead. He collapsed, pulling her down with him. The fight was over. In the ringing silence that followed, surrounded by the aftermath of the battle and his victorious soldiers, Jihan walked to her. He pulled her to her feet, his hands steady on her arms. He ignored Chairman Park, who was now on his knees, his face a picture of broken shock. Jihan's world narrowed to her. He gently touched the side of her face, his thumb brushing over her cheek. His eyes held hers, dark and intense. Then he spoke, his voice clear and carrying across the silent room, a decree for all his men to hear. "From now on," he said, "her safety is the safety of this family. Her enemies are our enemies. There will be no confusion on this point." It was not a declaration of love. It was a statement of absolute, unshakable fact. It was a coronation. The cost of that victory was the final, irrevocable incineration of her past. The girl who had dreamed of art museums and a quiet life was gone, burned away in the fire of that night. She had chosen this world of shadows, and there was no going back. Weeks later, Zara stood on the balcony of the penthouse. The Seoul skyline glittered below, a sea of diamonds on black velvet. The physical bruises had long since faded, but she knew the night in the library had left its own marks on her soul, scars that had forged her into someone stronger, someone harder. The glass door slid open. Jihan stepped out. He wore a soft black sweater, no suit, no armor. He held 2 glasses of wine, offering one to her. She took it, their fingers brushing for a moment. It was a spark of warmth in the cool night air. He stood beside her, not touching, but his presence was a solid, comforting weight at her side. The silence between them was different now. It was not the tense, watchful silence of their first weeks together, but an easy, shared quiet. They had faced death together, and in doing so, had forged a bond stronger than words. She was no longer a prisoner in this gilded cage. She had walked through the fire and chosen to stay. In the dark reflection of the glass, she saw them standing side by side, 2 figures against the vast, glittering city. She saw a survivor who had found her power and the quiet, dangerous man who had given her a sword instead of just a shield. The storm was over, but looking at him, at the intensity in his dark eyes as he watched her, she knew a different, more thrilling one was just beginning.